I'm Luella. The shrill pounding on my door still rings in my ears. It was just after twilight, the 3 sharp knocks making my heart plummet to my feet. When I opened the door, my father, Richard, stood there, rainwater running off his overcoat in rivulets. "You're all by yourself, Luella. No husband, no kids. We're taking this house," he declared, his voice cold as ice. Behind him, my older brother, Eric, sneered, and my mother, Victoria, clutched a box marked Master Suite. This was the same family who had cast me out in a tempest when I was jobless. Now, they wanted to snatch away everything I'd painstakingly built. I didn't shriek. I didn't sob. I just regarded them steadily, then reached for my phone. Little did they know what was about to unfold. I grew up in a quaint coastal town called Seaview. It was one of those places where everyone mowed their lawns on Sundays and waved hello, but rarely bothered to look you in the eye. My father, Richard, was a high-flying stockbroker. He worshipped money, order, and control above all else. He was the kind of man who had a color-coded spreadsheet for every aspect of his life. My mother, Victoria, was a socialite who thrived on appearances. Our house always had the freshest flowers, and every family event was a perfectly orchestrated show. Then there was Eric, my brother, for years my senior. He was the golden child, the apple of my parents' eyes. Everything he touched turned to gold in their eyes. He was a star athlete in high school and landed a prestigious internship at a top-tier law firm right out of college. My parents boasted about him at every social gathering, as if his achievements were a reflection of their own superiority. I, on the other hand, was the odd one out. I was quiet, introspective, and I loved creating digital art on my old MacBook. I would spend hours lost in a world of colors and pixels, designing imaginary websites and apps. I wasn't lazy. I just saw beauty in the things that couldn't be bought. At 15, while Eric was setting off to ski trips in the Alps, I was working at a local coffee shop, saving every penny in a piggy bank labeled College Dreams. I thought my parents would be proud of my hard work. Every Friday night, we'd have a family dinner, a 5-course meal painstakingly prepared by my mother. But it always ended with my father's lectures about success and the importance of having a real career. I remember the night I mustered up the courage to tell them I wanted to study graphic design. I'd rehearsed the words in my head for weeks. Graphic design? My father repeated, his fork clattering against his plate. "That's not a stable career, Luella. You'll end up broke and living in a dump." My mother tittered politely. "Sweetheart, people like you end up freelancing from their bedrooms. Study business, something that will make you money." Eric snorted. "Good luck getting a job with that artsy stuff." Their laughter filled the room, a cruel symphony that pierced my heart. I forced a laugh along with them, pretending it didn't hurt, but my hands were shaking under the table. That night, I hid my sketchbook in the back of my closet and stared at the screen of my laptop, vowing to prove them wrong. When I turned 18, Eric got a brand new BMW for his birthday. My father handed me a card with $100 inside. "Buy something practical," he said dismissively. I used it to buy a set of design software for my community college classes. The next 2 years were a nightmare. I worked double shifts at the coffee shop and pulled all-nighters studying design theory. I'd come home to my tiny apartment, reeking of coffee and exhaustion, and collapse on my bed, only to wake up and do it all over again. No one in my family ever asked how I was doing. No one cared if I was eating or sleeping. But my grandmother, Mildred, did. She lived in a small cottage on the edge of town and called me every week. "You've got a spirit as strong as an oak tree," she'd say. "Don't let them crush your dreams, dear." During summer vacations, while Eric was off on luxury cruises with my parents, I'd spend my days with Grandma Mildred. I'd help her tend to her flower garden, paint her picket fence, and fix her old computer. She'd tell me stories about how she'd built her cottage with her own 2 hands after my grandfather passed away. She was the one who taught me that being independent wasn't about being alone. It was about being free. I graduated from the State Art College at 21. There was no big ceremony, no family in the audience. Just me, holding my diploma in a cheap plastic folder outside the dean's office. That same week, I landed a junior graphic designer job at a local advertising agency. My starting salary was a meager $30,000 a year, but it was mine. I sent my parents a postcard with a picture of my cluttered desk and the words, "I got the job." They never replied. Over the years, Eric's success stories became the sole topic of conversation in my family. Every phone call, every family gathering was dominated by stories of his latest promotions and fancy business deals. When I got promoted at the agency, I excitedly called to share the news. My mother answered, her voice distracted. "That's nice, dear. Eric just landed a partnership at his law firm." The pride in her voice was like a knife in my heart. Eric never reached out to me unless he needed a favor. "Hey, can you design a logo for my new client? Or fix my presentation, will you?" I always helped him, hoping that one day he'd see me as more than just a free design service. But it was all in vain. At 26, I'd been at the agency for 5 years. I had a solid portfolio, but I still craved the validation from my family that never came. Then the unthinkable happened. The agency went bankrupt overnight. I was left jobless, with no warning and no severance pay. I tried to stay positive. I polished my portfolio, applied for every design job I could find, but the rejections piled up. Rent was due and my roommate moved out. I was left alone in our empty apartment, surrounded by boxes and unpaid bills. Desperate, I did the one thing I swore I'd never do. I called my parents. "Dad," I said, my voice trembling, "I lost my job. I need a loan for rent. I'll pay you back as soon as I can." My father sighed heavily. "Actions have consequences, Luella. You chose a risky career. We can't just bail you out every time things go wrong." "Please, Dad. It's only $5,000. Just until I find a new job," I pleaded. My mother's voice came on the line, cold and sharp. "We're helping Eric set up his own law firm. You need to be more responsible." And then the line went dead. That night, I drove to their house in the pouring rain. The lights were on, but when I knocked on the door, my father opened it just a crack. "Dad, please. I have nowhere else to go," I said, tears streaming down my face. "No," he said firmly. "You made your choices. Now live with them." My mother appeared behind him. "This isn't a good time, Luella." And then they shut the door in my face. I stood there in the rain, soaked to the bone, my heart broken. That was the moment I stopped calling them family. I spent the next week sleeping in my car, parked behind a supermarket. The heater barely worked, and I shivered under a thin blanket, listening to the sound of trucks coming and going. I showered at a gym with a single-use pass and charged my phone at a fast food joint. Every rejection email felt like a punch in the gut. One day, at a bookstore, I ran into an old classmate, Jasmine. She took one look at me and knew something was wrong. "Are you okay, Luella?" she asked, her eyes full of concern. I tried to lie, but the words caught in my throat. Tears welled up in my eyes, and I broke down. Jasmine didn't hesitate. "Come with me," she said, putting her arm around me. Her guest room was a haven. A real bed, soft sheets, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee in the morning. The next day, she helped me land an interview at her husband's design studio. His name was Kevin. He looked at my portfolio and smiled. "You've got talent. Start next week." It wasn't a glamorous job, but it was a lifeline. I worked long hours, took on every project I could, and slowly but surely, I started to rebuild my life. A few weeks later, Kevin called me into his office. "You're doing great work, Luella. I'm giving you a raise." For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. But then, my world turned upside down again. I got a call from Grandma Mildred's neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins. "Luella, your grandmother is in the hospital. It's serious." I rushed to the hospital, my heart in my throat. When I walked into her room, Grandma Mildred looked so small and frail in the hospital bed. She opened her eyes and smiled weakly. "You came," she whispered. "I'll always come, Grandma," I said, holding her hand tightly. 3 days later, she handed me an envelope from her bedside table. "It's yours, dear," she said. "My cottage and my savings. You deserve it." That night, She passed away in my arms. At the reading of the will, my parents and Eric sat across from me, their faces hard and angry. The lawyer read aloud, "To my beloved granddaughter, Luella, I leave my cottage and all my savings." My father stood up, his face red with rage. "This is unacceptable. That cottage should be family property." The lawyer remained calm. "Mrs. Mildred's wishes are legally binding." My mother hissed, "She manipulated you, Luella. You don't deserve this." I looked her in the eye. "You never visited her. You never cared about her." Eric sneered, "You're just lucky." I stood up, slipping the keys into my pocket. Grandma thought I deserved it, and that's all that matters. And then I walked out of the room. By sunset, I stood in front of the cottage. It was old and a bit run down, with peeling paint and an overgrown garden, but it was mine. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. For the first time in my life, I felt at home. I spent the next few months fixing up the cottage. I painted the walls, repaired the roof, and turned the attic into a studio. Kevin let me work remotely, and I started taking on freelance clients. Word of mouth spread, and soon, I had more work than I could handle. I met Ben a year later. He was a writer who lived in a nearby town. We started dating, and before I knew it, we were in love. Life was finally starting to look up. But then, after 5 years of silence, Eric called me.
"Hey, Luella.
Heard your business is booming. We were thinking of coming to visit for the weekend." I was hesitant, but I gave in. Maybe they'd changed, I thought. On Saturday, their car pulled up the driveway. My father stepped out, smiling, but there was an edge to his smile. My mother carried a bouquet of flowers, and Eric looked as smug as ever. They walked around the cottage, inspecting it like it was a piece of real estate. "You've done well," my mother said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "For someone without a proper family." I gritted my teeth and forced a smile. At lunch, my father cleared his throat. "This cottage is too big for just you, Luella. Don't you think it's a waste?" I looked at him, my heart sinking. "What are you suggesting?" He leaned forward. "Your mother and I could move in. Eric could use the studio for his side business." I stared at him in disbelief. "You can't be serious." Eric leaned back, his arms folded. "We're family, Luella. You owe us a place to stay." I laughed, a bitter laugh that echoed in the room. "Owe you? Like I owed you when I was begging for help and you left me out in the rain?" My father's face turned red. "That was different." "No, it wasn't," I said, standing up, my hands shaking. "Get out." My mother tried to calm me down. "You're being emotional. We just want to help." "Get out," I shouted. They left, but I knew it wasn't over. A few weeks later, Ben and I went to a design conference in the city. On the second day, I got a text from Mrs. Jenkins. "Luella, there are people at your cottage. They're moving in." My blood ran cold. I opened the security camera app on my phone and saw my father prying open the back door with a crowbar, my mother behind him with boxes, and Eric carrying suitcases. I called Eric. "What are you doing?" "We're moving in. This is a family home. You're alone and you don't need it all," he said casually. "You're breaking in. This is illegal," I said, my voice trembling. "We have a right to this place. Try to stop us and we'll contest Grandma's will," he threatened. "Try me," I said, my voice steadying. Ben and I drove straight home. When we arrived, the cottage looked like it had been invaded. My photos were gone, my furniture was rearranged, and their stuff was everywhere. My father turned around, his face calm. "You weren't supposed to be back so soon. It's done." I looked around, my anger boiling over. "Is it? You think you can just take what's mine?" He folded his arms. "We're family. This is our home." I took a deep breath and reached for my phone. "One call," I said quietly. I dialed 911. The dispatcher answered. "My family broke into my house, and I have video evidence," I said firmly. Within 20 minutes, 2 police cars pulled up. My father tried to play innocent. "This is a misunderstanding. We're family." I stepped forward, showing the officers the security footage. "Family doesn't break in with a crowbar," I said. The officer's expressions hardened. You have 30 minutes to pack your things and leave. Otherwise, you'll be arrested for breaking and entering. My mother started to cry. We have nowhere to go. That's not my problem, I said, my voice cold. They scrambled to pack their things, shouting and arguing with each other. Eric mumbled curses under his breath, and my father kept insisting they had a right to the cottage. When they finally left, I closed the door behind them. The cottage was quiet again. I looked around at the mess they'd made, but for the first time, I felt a sense of peace. I knew that I'd finally stood up for myself and protected what was mine. Months passed, and the police confirmed the charges against my father and Eric. They pleaded guilty and received suspended sentences and probation. A restraining order was put in place, keeping them 500 feet away from me. The garden in front of the cottage bloomed with colorful flowers, and Ben and I built a small bench under the old oak tree. One evening, as we were sitting there, watching the sunset, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I answered, and my mother's voice came through, trembling. I heard you're engaged and that you're starting a family. I just wanted to say I'm proud of you. For a long moment, I was silent. Then, softly, I said, "Thank you." As I hung up the phone, I looked up at the sky. The same storm that once battered me had passed, leaving behind a beautiful rainbow. Peace, at last, felt like home.